Oh, thank you all for attending, and the meeting is now live, and on we've got apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. We've got apologies from Councillor Cheadle, Councillor Sellis and Councillor Ball, but he might be joining us on Teams later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any declarations of interest as set out in the agenda? That's great, thank you. 3, there are no items requiring urgent attention, in my opinion. So 4, confirmation of minutes. Members happy with the minutes? Yep. Okay, that's confirmed. Thanks very much. Could I come straight through to 5, Grant Thornton, Interim Auditor's Annual Report.
Thanks very much, Chair, and good morning, everyone. So the first of our 2 papers today, as you've just heard, is the Interim Auditor's Annual Report. There's a number of words in that title, so I'll just explain some of them and why they're there. So the interim needs to be included in the title, as I'm unable to issue this as a final until the audits of both financial years, which this report covers, being 21-2 and 22-3. Until those financial statements audits are completed, I can't issue this as a final. In reality, our work has been completed on the arrangements. These are our findings and our proposed recommendations. Normally, I would not expect this report to change from the report that is in front of you, with the exception of me removing the word interim from the title and then resharing with Lisa, Pauline and colleagues. So just to explain that title and what that is. What this report does is set out our commentary on the arrangements that the Council has to secure value for money. We do that under the National Audit Office's Code of Audit Practice, which says we need to consider 3 key areas, and those 3 key areas are financial sustainability, governance, and improving economy efficiency and effectiveness. And the report sets out our commentary on each of those areas, covering the arrangements for the 2 years. I'm not going to talk through every page of the report because there's lots of words in there. If I pick out some key highlights and then offer it out to comment or question from committee members. So if I start on page 9 of the committee pack, the executive summary, what that shows is there are no significant weaknesses in arrangements. Now, significant weaknesses is again terminology used in the code, but we are saying overall we consider arrangements in each of those 3 areas to be appropriate. We have identified some improvement recommendations, which I'll touch on in a moment. An improvement recommendation is the lowest level of recommendation that I'm able to issue. So if you're thinking this as red, amber, green, an improvement recommendation is a green coloured recommendation. Over the page, we set out the high-level summary against those 3 key areas, and what I'll intend to do is touch on those rather than the detail in the following pages. So in respect of financial sustainability, the Council continues to perform well. We think with financial sustainability, a stable track record of budget management, we consider the budget setting process, we also consider the medium-term financial plan. Now, notwithstanding that is based on a number of assumptions, as every council has to make a number of assumptions, at the time the medium-term financial plan was produced, we considered those assumptions to be appropriate, reasonable. Clearly, the UK is going through a large element of uncertainty, economic uncertainty, so probably the only certainty in that MTFP is some of those assumptions won't end up being true, but that being said, we consider that the plans are prudent and assumptions were based on reasonable assumptions at the time they were made. We did raise 1 improvement recommendation in respect of the financial sustainability section, and this was more around capital planning rather than revenue plan. I'm aware that Hub Committee is considering capital plans and looking at what does the Council's capital plan moving forward look like. Given what I've also just said about economic uncertainty and clearly interest rates, borrowing costs, etc., it seems an appropriate time to be doing that, considering what actually are the priorities of the Council over the next few years. And so that recommendation was made. You can see management's comprehensive response to that recommendation, and we're aware that is in train or will be discussed and considered already moving forward. Governance, which is the next area. So our work on business as usual, governance hasn't identified any significant weaknesses either. We do note that in 21-2, the council was one of a small number of councils who had their financial statements audited by the national deadline. We've had a number of conversations about that at previous audit and governance committees, as well as the 22-3 financial year. We've identified our other two improvement recommendations fall against the governance area, and if I just move to those in the report, they are set out on pages 22 and 23. Excuse me. So the first, first area on page 22 was around enhancing stakeholder engagement. So we can see that stakeholders are engaged, and there are attempts to engage with stakeholders around some key decisions. The improvement recommendation realises that could be enhanced to make it a more meaningful approach, or certainly get more meaningful responses from those stakeholders that are engaged. The council does attempt to engage with stakeholders, but there could be more fulsome or more meaningful responses in some areas. Appreciating some of the period under review, COVID pandemic was still in place, so that made certainly some of the engagement more challenging. And then over the page, recommendation 3 is in respect of procurement. So internal audit colleagues have previously looked at procurement and given a number of recommendations from their review. We're saying that they are really important recommendations, and the action plan does and should be implemented, which the council is working towards. We also recognise some specific challenges there around resource, and that gets picked out within that recommendation as well on page 23. Final comments I'll make start on page 29. So this follows a previous auditor's annual report released in 2021, which made a number of recommendations within that report, and pages 29 to 31 follow up the progress of those recommendations that were made previously. Pleasing to note that the vast majority of those considered addressed and therefore no further action. The one that is still work in progress links to that procurement recommendation that I've just referred to previously. So we say that is in progress, and further improvement recommendation raised in that area. I wasn't going to say any more, Chair, because there's lots of detail in there, but I'd rather open it up for comment or question.
Thank you very, very much for a very good summary. Do any members have any comments or questions? Councillor Oxburgh.
It's on page 18 of our pack, which is page 10 of the report. There's a financial sustainability graph, and I'm just wondering if you could give that some context. West Devon sits down in the lower sort of elements of in terms of reserves, whereas some councils have absolutely whopping great reserves. Is there a general guideline as to whether or not, or where those reserves should sit, and whether or not we sit within that recommended framework? Are we too high? Are we too low? Are we about right? Is I suppose the question.
Well, through you, Chair. Thanks for the question. So, historically, if you do ask that question, people might say around 5% would be a benchmark that councils may work to. That was a historical benchmark. What this graph is trying to show is, you're correct, it sits slightly towards the lower end than a number. There are a few that skew that graph towards the left-hand side quite considerably. It's a very valid question. When Lisa is setting the budget annually, she needs to consider, are reserves appropriate and at an appropriate level in terms of the risk that the council faces. So Lisa will set out a statement annually to stay in her statutory role. She does or does not believe that reserves are appropriate. Lisa has said she does believe reserves are appropriate. Ultimately, there's two elements to this, aren't there? So there's the general fund, which is there for shocks, unexpected events, and then you'll have your earmarked reserves set aside for specific projects. A number of those tend to be capital projects, given they're multi-year in nature. You can only spend your reserves once, and that's why it's such an important element to be managed appropriately. By setting out this graph, and in our assessment, we're saying, overall, we think this is a reasonable level of reserves. We don't think there's a high level of risk here. Clearly, you don't know what's around the corner. So if there was an unexpected shock and there was a call on reserves, that then needs to be considered into future financial years as well as to how may you replenish those reserves or not. I think the other pleasing aspect within the financial sustainability element is there aren't plans to continually rely on those reserves annually to balance your revenue budget, because that would be a clear sign that there may be trouble moving ahead. As I said, once you've spent them, they're gone. So you shouldn't be using these to balance revenue budgets annually. Clearly, if there's an element of smoothing, or you need to rely on reserves for a year before a further transformation project, for example, comes into place to deliver savings, that would be an appropriate use of reserves. But for the council, this tries to benchmark it based on gross revenue spend, so that you don't have much larger councils who will understandably have much larger reserves because their spend is much higher. So it doesn't cause me any concerns. As I said, Lisa statutorily needs to consider these reserves annually, and we've not raised any concerns that these appear to be significantly too low, or that you're planning to use these reserves to balance revenue budgets year on year.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? I have one, but any... I was actually going to ask about the recommendations on page 22, about governance. And one was about, as you alluded to, the procurement. That's down as a work in progress. I'm just wondering what that progress is.
So the work in progress, in 2021, we raised a recommendation around procurement and the Devon District's procurement strategy. That was the one area of prior year recommendation where we still say there is work in progress, and that we've linked this to this updated recommendation now, which follows on from work that internal audit colleagues have also undertaken. Lisa, I don't know if you're able to provide any further update in terms of current progress on that.
Yes, thank you, Jackson. So yes, in the management comments there on page 23, we are currently advertising for a procurement support officer post. So we have got a procurement lead. That is a resource that we share with Teambridge and South Hams, and we are conscious that that procurement lead officer needs some support. So we are out to advert at the moment for that procurement support officer post, and out to recruitment. And we do think that will bolster the resource that the councils have for procurement. We've also obviously promoted the procurement rules and regulations to officers. So recently the council has updated the constitution. There's updated contract procedure rules within there, clear responsibilities for procuring managers, and we've done a very short briefing note for all managers that procure goods and services for the council that very clearly set out what those rules are. So, for example, goods and services below 25,000, one written quotation, over 25,000, 3 written quotations are needed. And then there are different levels, thresholds that have to be adhered to. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Yeah, so Paul Middlehouse from DAP. So just for your information, we are completing an audit on procurement. It's a follow-on audit on procurement. I think we still have concerns about resources. So obviously you're aware that the Procurement Act was passed recently and is due to come into effect in October 2024. So all councils will need to undertake, I suppose, fairly significant work to get ready for that Act, and think about how they can use the additional freedoms to deliver and enhance corporate objectives and priorities and so on. So I think our current challenge in our work to management is, do you have the current resource, but are you lining up sufficient resource to get ready for that Act that's coming in? So we'll provide a report in the next audit committee meeting.
Thank you. Would you like to comment, Lisa?
Yes, Chairman. So yes, I mean, we have identified that we do need more resource for procurement, hence the current recruitment. You know, we feel the partnership that we are in with not only Southampton and Teambridge, the free council partnership. That does give us economies of scale, it gives us efficiencies, particularly around knowledge and experience. But yes, we do recognise that we do need technical support as well to support that officer, that shared resource. And yes, I'm not sure how many applications we've had for that post, but we've had 2 applications. Thank you, Mr. Hawke. So yes, that's something we will be progressing shortly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further comments? I guess the committee notes the report, I suppose. Is that what we're supposed to do, note it? Yeah, thank you. Can we move on to the next part, the audit plan?
Yep, thank you. So this is the audit plan for the financial year ended 31st of March 2023. So the focus of this document is largely on the financial statements audit rather than value for money, which the previous document focused on. We've had probably 2 or 3 discussions now in terms of the timing of the audit at previous committees. This document sets out our proposed approach and sets out significant risks identified in our financial statements audit. We do this to comply with auditing standards, so there's a number of elements of this document which we are required to report to the committee in its role as those charged with governance. Again, I'm going to pick out some of the key elements rather than go through page by page, if that's okay, Chair. So I'm going to start on page 44 of today's pack, which is introduction and headlines. So on this page, we set out a number of key elements. So significant risks I just referred to, that's audit standard terminology, but it says what are some of the areas of the accounts that we will focus on more than potentially others. There are 4 elements set out in the bullet points there. So management override of controls is an assumed risk at any entity that is being audited. So as auditors, we live in a world where we have to assume that people are trying to do things that they shouldn't be doing, and this risk covers that, and we're not able to rebut that anywhere. We consider key areas here are around estimation, journal entries, etc., and our testing approach is designed to identify any potential suggestions of management override of controls. We're not raising this because we think it has happened, but we are required to think and be sceptical that this has happened. The other 3 areas then are key estimates made within the financial statements that experts are used for because of their nature. So they are the valuation of land and buildings. So this building, for example, and the land it sits on, and other council land and buildings. The valuation of the investment properties that the council owns, which again need to be valued annually. And then the valuation of the pension fund net liability. So as at each year end, a valuation under accounting standards has to be made to say, if that were all to crystallise today, what might be the liability that the council would have to meet? So these are all at a point in time, which is the balance sheet date, but given there's significant estimates and judgments made in the valuation of these areas of account, they are significant risks and we are required to do significant amounts of work on them. As auditors, we don't audit to the pound or the penny. We set a materiality level that we work to. That materiality level is just over £500,000. Now, what that doesn't mean is we don't look at things below that level, but what that means is, given the council's expenditure and the size of its assets and liabilities, if something were, let's say, £400,000 incorrect, we don't believe that that would impact the reader of the financial statement to a significant degree based on the total level. We would clearly report that to Lisa, to Pauline and to yourselves, but I would still be able to issue an unqualified opinion, say overall these accounts are true and fair. Any errors, uncertainties over £30,000 would be reported through our findings report to yourselves. And then just in terms of audit logistics, so the audit has actually started. Colleagues are working with finance team and undertaking audit work. Our intention is, so that started last month, November, that will probably flow through into January, and we will report our findings at the next audit committee. Final point then, so we're required to set out our proposed fees, set out the proposed fee there, and then later in the report that fee is broken down. That consists of the scale fee set by public sector audit appointments and then various variations to that scale fee, a number of which have been in place for a number of years. As always, any variations from that scale fee need to be agreed by public sector audit appointments who manage the contract. I wasn't going to go through the rest of the report in huge amounts of detail because I think that summary picks out the key points. The only other element that I wanted to raise that is potentially slightly different to normal or is new. So page 50, we set out that the council did implement a new payroll system during the year of audit, and we set out some of the procedures that we'll consider and undertake as part of that element of risk. It's something that we as auditors see a number of times, so it's not unusual in that sense, but it is another area of focus for us for this financial year. At that point, I will stop and ask for any questions again.
Thank you very much. Anybody got any comments or questions? In that case, could I just ask a question of detail to start with, at least? And you're referring to an ITGC. I just wonder if you want to say a few words about what that is and what assurance you get from it.
Sure, yeah, thank you. So ITGC stands for IT General Controls. You'll appreciate we're all sat here on laptops today, so go back a number of years, the financial ledgers would have been handwritten. Now there's a huge amount of reliance placed on computers, data to produce financial statements, to set out workflows within a system to make sure it gets sent to the right person to do the right thing before it moves on. And also people's access. So I talked about management override of controls as an example. If, for whatever reason, somebody within the council was given inappropriate access to the financial system, so they log onto their laptop, but they have access to the ledger, and they shouldn't have that access, they could clearly then do things on that ledger if they knew how to use it that wouldn't be appropriate. So our work around IT General Controls looks at when people start at the council, when people leave at the council, when they change role, are their accesses set up appropriately in a timely way? If someone leaves, is their access revoked in an appropriate time period? Are there appropriate arrangements in place behind the financial systems for data recovery, data backups, etc.? So it's an area of the audit that's not necessarily the numbers, but the numbers are driven by IT so much that we need to get an understanding of that IT control framework to understand are there control issues or potential control issues that could lead to those financial statements that we're auditing being incorrect for whatever reason. So that's the work that we need to consider for IT General Controls. We set out some of the key systems and the systems that feed into the ledger that ultimately produce the accounts. And it's those systems that we're really interested in, I suppose, because they're the ones with the financial data that ultimately produce the accounts.
Thank you very much. Anybody want to comment or query? Well, thank you very much. I suppose we note that. Thank you very much for all that work. I think we're on to Agenda 7, which is the unaudited draft summary accounts. Councillor Edmonds.
Thank you, Chair. The draft statement of accounts and the draft annual governance statement for the financial year ended the 31st of March 2023 were presented to this committee in July of this year. The statutory requirements can make the draft statement of accounts a challenging read for those of us without an accountancy background. So Mrs. Henstock has skillfully put together a more user-friendly version which should help members of the public and our businesses to get an understanding of the financial position of the council for the year ended 23. And just to confirm that the figures have not changed from the statutory version noted by this committee in July. The 2022-23 audit started in November 23, as I think Mr. Jackson's just highlighted, and is on target to be completed at the end of January 2024, after which the audited statement of accounts will be brought back to the Audit and Governance Committee for approval in March 2024.
The report recommendation is that the draft unaudited summary accounts for the financial year ended 31st of March 2023 are noted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Comments, questions? I personally think this is great, absolutely great, and thank the officers for doing this, marvellous. So it's duly noted. So I think we're on 8 now. That's brilliant. Oh. Yeah. Progress on the audit plan, Councillor Edmonds.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the Devon Audit Partnership Update Report for the Audit and Governance Committee. The update report summarises the audits provided since the last Audit Committee meeting in October and notes the progress to deliver the audit plan. Members will have noted that the Head of Internal Audit's opinion is of reasonable assurance on the adequacy and effectiveness of the Council's internal control framework. It's also pleasing to note that the areas of Energy Bill Support Scheme, Treasury Management, Main Accounting, Electoral Registration and UK Shared Prosperity Fund all received a substantial assurance audit opinion. The report also confirms that 9 reasonable assurance opinions have been provided so far this year. Progress is currently on track to deliver the audit plan for 2023-24 with 21 out of 39 audits at draft or final report stage and 6 more in field work. And with your permission, Chair, I'd like to hand over to Paul Middlemass, who will provide some additional comments on the update report.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, so good morning, Paul Middlemass from DEP. So this is our usual DEP report for members on our work. So as Councillor Edmonds has said, this year we provided five substantial and 9 reasonable assurance reports, which supports an overall reasonable assurance opinion for the year. 4 of our substantial reports are in this report, and we also provide reasonable assurance reports for 3 others. Page 76 provides a basic summary of those audits that we've got in the report, with more detail, of course, is in the Appendix 1. There's also on page 77 some commentary on counter fraud, and I'll pass over to Ken in a minute to provide a bit more detail on the work on single person discounts. And then just some other areas. So we had our DAP event on the 16th of November at Fast Abbey, and I hope that those who attended will confirm it was a useful event, and we are thinking of another event in May next year. Also, the advert for independent members for audit committees has gone live. Included in this paper is a link to the advert for people to see what the advert looks like. And then finally, we're starting to prepare our audit plan for 24-25, and that will be submitted to March meeting, but obviously happy to take any suggestions or comments before that period. So the next few months we'll be preparing the audit plan. And then if I could just hand over to Ken to talk about single person's discount.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you for inviting me here this morning. Just to give you a swift update, I won't take too much of your time on the single person discount review that we tried to organise, and South Hams and West Devon have both taken that up and are currently undertaking that exercise. West Devon's was first to go through on that exercise. The results are starting to come back. The thinking behind this was, and I can't take all of the credit, in that we shared the risk with the operator, which reduces the potential for spending unnecessarily for the local authority. It also makes sure that everybody is treated exactly the same, and your customers are treated and have a top of the range sort of response plan in place for when they do contact, as part of the service that we're paying for. So As I said, I can't take all of the credit for it because the initial idea was one of your officers pre-COVID. And that worked. We're really just regenerating the same idea, but on a bigger scale. So the results will come in. I'll be liaising with Lisa quite closely. It's early days yet. You are halfway through the process, but I will keep you updated as the results come in. But it is working, and it is removing single-person discounts from those who are not responding, and those who've confirmed that they're no longer entitled. I'll put it mildly. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both. Comments, questions? Well, I've just got a couple of comments. I was really pleased that there's a lot of very vivid green here of substantial assurance. I think it should give the committee a lot of comfort. That's good. I've just got a question on, I wonder if you can give me an update on the creditors on page 82, 83. And it talks about transaction, 83, authorisation limits given to individuals reviewed several years ago, but it'd be beneficial to repeat the exercise. Several officers have very high limits, can authorise payments up to £1 million. I just wondered what was happening about that.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It is an issue that we are aware of, and Mrs Henstock, as Head of Finance, has tasked one of our senior accountants with reviewing those limits, and that will be actioned before the end of December. There are a couple of accounts on there which are historic, and their limits we do need to change. So that is being actioned, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Comments? Well, I shall take my privilege of just getting one more question as Chair's privileges, if you like, is page 84 on complaints. And it talks about previously reported lessons learnt from complaints. I just wondered what was happening about this report about lessons learnt.
Yeah, so obviously, as it says, our previous report said that there should be a process to, I suppose, analyse and consider the comments and recommendations and, complaints, and then provide some sort of high-level feedback to members about, what the conclusions are, and also made available on the website so the public can see, well, what are the areas of concern that most people are complaining about. And obviously, we've suggested that there needs to be action to put that in place. And I'm just the accepted date is the 30th of November to see if that information can be put on the website.
Could I ask the Section 151 officer to comment?
Yes, Chairman, that's our target date that we're aiming for. There is also a report on today's agenda about the Ombudsman report, and that's where any complaints which haven't been resolved by stage 2 have gone on to the Ombudsman, and I think we can discuss that when we get onto that item, Chairman, but I think that's a very pleasing outcome of that Ombudsman complaint. So yes, we are aware of the deadlines and we are working to those. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any comments, questions? In that case, we note the report, I guess, and thank you very much. Councillor Edmonds, Treasury report. Treasury Management.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. So this report gives an update on the Council's Treasury and Management position as at the 30th of September. At that date, the Council had achieved an investment interest rate return of 4.34% against the industry benchmark of 4.71%. The slight underperformance of 0.37% against benchmark is due to 2 debt management office investments being below 4% at the start of the year, which has brought the weighting down. All DMO investments have now been reinvested at current interest rates, as shown on the list of investments held by the Council at the 30th of September 23, and the list can be found on pages 94 and 95 of your agenda papers. The Council's budget for investment interest in 23-24 is 400,000. But as interest rates have increased since agreeing the budget, the current forecast for investment interest is 1.030 million, an expected budget surplus of almost £630,000. The latest forecast provided by the Council's Treasury Advisor shows that rates are likely to remain at current levels until the autumn of next year, with any eventual reduction dependent on a fall in the rate of inflation. Moving on to the Council's borrowing position, as at the end of September, the amount of borrowing outstanding was £27.3 million against a capital financing requirement, or CFR, of £25.5 million. The slight excess in amount borrowed is a short-term position pending future financing requirements of capital expenditure. So in summary, members, the conclusion is that Treasury Managed performance at the midpoint of the year is in line with the Treasury Management strategy agreed by Council in April 23, except for Treasury Management income, which is anticipated will exceed the agreed budget at the year end. And my thanks to Ms Scotton for an excellent report which recommends that the Audit Committee resolves to endorse the contents of the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Before I throw it open, I'd just like to thank the Section 151 officer for arranging the training on finance treasury management, which I think was attended by about half the council. And I found it very informative, and I hope the rest of us did. And that training, I think, informs this report tremendously. Does anyone have any comments, questions? That's good. I've just got one, just one observation, if you like. I think it's just picking up on page 97, I think, where it says this remarkable result of forecasting 1,034,000. And I suppose that means that that's about 10% of our total revenue income, which is, is that going to be reflected, and does that need a further reflection in our risk register, since it now is a significant part of our income? Or do we need to do anything more, or are we okay?
Happy to take that question, Chairman. So yes, I think certainly what we need to do, and this is what we've done, is we need to project forward what we think our treasury management income will be for the next financial year and the year after that, because we are conscious, and it does show in the interest rate forecast that although we are achieving investment income of over 5% at the moment, we know that in 2 years' time, base rate is likely to be down around 3%. So whilst we are achieving about £1 million in treasury management income at the moment, we know that in a couple of years' time, we need to plan for that income reducing. So in the medium-term financial strategy, in the last budget report, we are making assumptions that for next year, that income will go down to about 750,000. So we're getting £1 million this year. We think 750,000 the year after, and then the year after that, we've reduced our budget down to 600,000. So I think it's about having that long-term financial forecasting. We've used the best intelligence that we can around interest rate forecasts, which have come from linked services, and in terms of mitigating that, we are looking at what long-term investments we can enter into. So investments over 12 months where we can lock into a good interest rate now, knowing that in a couple of years' time, those interest rates won't be available. We can see already that the morning rates that we're getting are starting to decrease. So banks and building societies are already factoring in that base rate is going to go down in the future, and probably 5.25, which is the base rate at the moment, that is likely to be the top. We don't think it will go higher. And so we think base rates have peaked. and they will start to decrease now over the next 2 years and probably flatline out at about 3%. So we're building that into our budget. I think what would be really helpful, and there has been a lot of press coverage around this, is having more than a 1-year financial settlement from government. I think it's very difficult to do long-term strategic financial planning when you only get your figures 1 year at a time. And whilst we can estimate what will happen in 2-3 years' time in terms of local government reforms, all we can do is use our best estimates and the best modelling available to us, really. So in terms of risk, I think we've mitigated that as much as we can by using the latest forecasts, but also trying to enter into some long-term investments where we can. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, that's very clear. Any comments, queries? I guess we're happy to endorse. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Which one is item 10? Strategic risk update and framework. Councillor Edmonds.
Yeah, thank you. The Council's risk and opportunity management strategy has been in place since 2018. And this report provides an update to the strategy and the strategic risk register for the Council. It's important to note that the strategic risk register forms only part of the overall risk management approach, with each service area and project having its own operational risk register. An officer-level performance board has been established and meets on a monthly basis to consider the overall operating environment and organisational performance, which helps inform any updates to the strategic risk profile. The Council will also look to identify and manage opportunities, including those supporting better and more cost-effective provision of services to the public by seizing new opportunities and managing the risks involved. Turning to the strategy itself at Appendix A, it sets out the reporting arrangements, and members will note this includes 6 monthly risk reports to the Audit and Governance Committee. It also sets out details of the important specific risk areas and risk management scoring matrix, and the overall risk score is calculated by multiplying the likelihood by the highest impact category score. Looking at the updated risk register at Appendix B, we can see that there are no red areas identified. Cybersecurity has been added to the register with a risk score of 16. The risk of a cyber attack is ever present and could lead to a significant and prolonged impact on our technology services, which in turn would affect our ability to deliver our services. A summary of each of the 5 identified strategic risks and the action being taken to manage these risks can be found at the end of the risk register. Finally, Chair, the report has 3 recommendations, and they are that the Audit and Governance Committee consider the updated risk and opportunity management strategy, recommend to Council that the updated risk and opportunity management strategy be adopted, and consider the updated strategic risk register. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, it's very clear. Comments, questions, queries? Well, I shall invoke Chairman's perks again on here. Just ask for one. I did page 120, I'll start on minutiae, if you like. Important specific risk areas on health and safety. And it says, perhaps monitored by an H&S group chaired by a chief exec. I'm just wondering what that means, because it sort of suggests, but it's not happening. Just wondered if someone can help me with that.
Thank you, Chairman. And yes, I mean, it is happening. I think what we're trying to set out there is some specific risk areas and how we might address them. But I take that point, and we should say that it is happening rather than perhaps.
Okay, it gives the assurance that it is happening. That's great. My other bit was actually on the new risk. I've got just scrolling down to get the page. Sorry. which is page 129, which is on the summary of strategic risk and cybersecurity, is a new risk. Well, we've been talking a lot, have we not, about cybersecurity today and earlier. And I think it'd be very useful is if there could be a deep dive, the committee could be presented with a deep dive on this at the future meeting, particularly in the principle that it is a new risk, and it is a very high risk, 4-4, if you like, on this. Could we arrange that?
If I could, Chairman, I mean, more than happy to arrange a briefing. What I wouldn't want to do is to discuss our cybersecurity arrangements in public forum, for obvious reasons. But more than happy to arrange a briefing for members of the Audit and Governance Committee in terms of some of the measures that we are putting in place across the organisation. Because, as I say, obviously we're limited to what we can put in public documents, but we could arrange that.
Councillor Oxford.
Just ask a clarification on one aspect of that, and that is, will you be able to cover also mitigation measures in the event of, in particular, cybersecurity?
Absolutely, we could invite, and actually he did it for the previous council. Paul Woodward is our IT security manager, so we would get him along to that session to talk about some of those things, yeah.
Sorry, carry on.
Yes, just to note that we are finishing up our draft report on cybersecurity, which will come to the next audit committee meeting, which obviously will be part B as well, so that can be tied up into the overall session on cybersecurity arrangements.
Thank you. That sort of answers a logistical question, doesn't it? It seems to fit together quite neatly. Okay. Does anybody have further comments, questions? Are we happy then? I'm not going to read the recommendations out. Are we happy to endorse and support the recommendations? Thank you very much. Right, I'm now scrolling through, sorry. 11, anti-fraud, bribery and corruption, snappy title.
Apologies, Chair, it's not that, not
that
snappy.
I've got a brief introduction, if you
Sorry.
wish, Chair. Yes, thank you, Chair. Recent assessments state that there is an epidemic of fraud cases. Fraud now accounts for 40% of all crimes. It's anticipated that this will further increase by 25% in the coming years. In response, the government has formed the Public Sector Fraud Authority. Given this landscape, it's important that the Council has effective measures in place to reduce the risk and impact of fraud. The Council has engaged the services of the Devon Audit Partnership Counter-Fraud Services Team, who support and facilitate the development of the Council's counter-fraud processes and capability, which improves its resilience to fraud and related offences. The Counter-Fraud Services Team has produced a Counter-Fraud Resilience and Assessment Report and helped to update the Council's anti-fraud, bribery and corruption policy, response plans and whistleblowing policy, and these documents are appended to this report. And I'm pleased to say, Chair, that the DAP Counter-Fraud Services Manager, Mr. Ken Johnson, is with us today, and if I may, Chair, hand over to Mr. Johnson to provide an overview of the suite of documents in front of us today.
Thank you very much.
Apologies for jumping the gun. Yeah, thank you for that nice introduction. It is, I don't want to use sort of terminology that inflames the situation, but it is epidemic proportions. Fraud is now, you're more likely to be a victim of fraud than any other crime in the UK. We know it's underreported, and most of you probably in the room will probably not send the texts or the emails on to the relevant authority. You just delete them. It has now become part of everyday life for all of us. So hopefully, as we work together going forward, we can improve the resilience, and part of Devon Audit Partnership's response to all of this is in what we call an integrated assurance approach, where risk, audit and counter fraud work together, and we form one circle. You get a better idea of being able to make decisions and gain assurance from those decisions. So what you have in front of you is a new policy. The policy is basically, it's not intended to be overcomplicated, but it goes through what the definitions of those potential criminal offences are, and that is important because people very often will overlook them and not understand exactly what they are. So it's important, that they understand what those offences look like, where they can report them, and the responsibilities of officers, members, and all the rest of us on how we deal with that. One of the biggest things we have very often is with local authorities that people don't know where they need to report these things. And local authorities are self-regulating in respect of fraud work. You don't get a huge amount of money for it, but they are self-regulating. So it is important that the council looks at itself and utilises the knowledge that the team and the wider Devon Audit Partnership team have in protecting itself as much as possible. So the policy is, as I say, I'm not going to go through, you know what a policy is, and you know what that means. So the strategy and the response plan basically goes into a little bit more depth and shows how we deal with these risks, how they would be dealt with. These are front-page documents, obviously, and this is no secret. There's no magic involved in what we would do if we find someone attempted to commit fraud against the local authority, and people need to understand both within the organisation and outside of the organisation what that looks like and how we would operate. We operate in a very similar way when we're protecting local authorities to, we're not the police, but we have investigative powers, and you can prosecute offenders. And if it should come to that, then we would obviously do that. But in the main, we would try to prevent. Prevention is always better than cure. Okay. So again, without going into too much detail, and I'm happy to take questions at the end. Do you want me to go through them individually and take questions, or are you happy for me to go through the suite and take questions?
If any members have got questions, I'll answer your question by asking if anybody's got questions.
Otherwise, I'll just keep talking about all these things. And
well, I'd like to thank you for that. It's very comprehensive. I've certainly got a question. I've got a couple of questions, actually. I suppose the first one is how this policy and response plan is being promoted in the council itself, so that members of staff are aware of it.
Through you, Chairman, if these policies are approved and agreed today by the committee, we will then start to promote those with staff, in particular things like the whistleblowing policy, obviously the anti-fraud policies. We will also need to do, and this is on the agenda for the March committee, a very detailed fraud risk register, fraud risk assessment, and also in March we will do a report on counter-fraud activity. So I am the council's responsible officer for fraud and the council's lead officer for fraud. So particularly during COVID, when we were doing the business grants, you know, over 30 million was paid out by the council, and it was very clear in those documents that the responsible officer for any fraud was the Section 151 officer. So I think it makes sense for me to continue that role. But yes, thank you very much to Devon Audit Partnership for updating these policies for us, making sure it refers to the latest legislation. We've put things in there like current post holders, so we refer to the monitoring officer, we refer to the Section 151 officer, and yes, we will be promoting these with staff and managers if they are approved today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Oxborough.
Given the prolific nature of fraud that's happened and is happening, and the fact that this actually affects every aspect of the council's business, are there any plans for a member briefing which will cover the comprehensive nature of this policy and response plan?
Yes, thank you, Vice Chairman. One of the things that this review has highlighted in the work that's been done by Devon Audit Partnership is that we do need to do fraud awareness training for all members. So just as we've done the treasury management training, in the new year we will be looking to do some fraud training with members. And we also need to do that with our senior managers and heads of service and directors. So again, that's something we will be looking to do as well. So yes, Ken has very kindly done fraud training for us. I think it was a couple of years ago. It was before COVID, with our senior managers, and we all found that very insightful, very helpful, and it just helps raise the profile of it, I think, within the council. So yes, those are two things that very much we will be looking to do in the new year, and have been highlighted in the sort of self-assessment checklist of areas that we need to take some further action and make sure things are in place. Thank you.
Can I suggest, given the importance of this subject, that we stress on members that they really should be aiming to attend this? It's almost a mandatory thing. I know we can't make it mandatory, but it should be stressed that it's of that level of importance.
Yes, we can certainly do that, and also maybe through group leaders, if they can also promote within their political groups the importance of trying to attend that training. And actually, if we could get a date in the diary sort of quite soon, you know, that will be helpful for members in having, you know, an advance warning of when that training is going to be. So yeah, I can certainly liaise with Devon Audit Partnership about when sort of availability, because also probably we'll try to get that on a Tuesday as well, because that's the day that members have got sort of earmarked for council business. So, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm sure people attend because it's an interesting subject anyway. Questions? Further questions? I've got one on, I think it's page 163, and where it goes on, there's a sort of checklist of what we do. There's an annual fraud plan agreed by the committee. And then our response is there's no annual fraud plan as such, rather than a work programme. I just wondered if we could tease out what the difference between a fraud plan and a work plan, a work programme is.
Sorry, through you, Chair. The difference would be, obviously, I'm in contact with Lisa, Pauline, and various other officers of the council, and we're reacting at the moment to certain requirements that are required through various officers of the council. What we would prefer, and what the best sort of practice is to set out, based on a risk register, basically, based on the fraud risks that your 151 officer and I will be sort of looking at in the coming months, is reacting to what we feel are the biggest risks within the organisation. It's very difficult to do that without having that risk assessment in place first. So that's all I would say to you, is that we are working together, but we don't have any formalised risk assessment in place yet, so it's difficult to put a plan around that.
So do I interpret that as saying, in due course, there will be an annual fraud plan, but there isn't because of what you just said?
Yes, very much, Chairman. Yes, that is something we will definitely get done before the March committee meeting, and yes, we can update the policy to say that. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Any more comments or queries? Well, could we take the recommendations? Are we content? Yeah, I'll take that. Thank you. Where are we now? I will scroll down to the housing benefits. Okay, housing benefit overpayments.
Thank you, Chair. The Council has a responsibility to collect housing benefit overpayments, and this new standalone report reflects the revenues and benefits team's desire to take ownership of and be more accountable for its performance, as well as being able to demonstrate service improvements. The report clearly sets out the Council's approach to the collection arrangements and the amount of housing benefit overpayment currently outstanding. In paragraph 3.5 of the report, we can see that a dedicated post has been created to deal with overpayments, and challenging targets have been set for the level of income to be collected. Looking at the Council's historic collection performance, it is significantly better than the South West and national position, and the half-year position to the end of September shows that the Council's performance is on a par with both regional and national performance. This report sets a baseline of the current level of housing benefit overpayments, and future reports will provide updates on progress and performance compared to the baseline position. And the committee is asked to note the contents of the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Comments, questions? Councillor Oxford?
That there are overpayments happening begs the question, what measures are in place to prevent that from happening in the first place?
There's a good question to somebody to answer.
I'm happy to take that one through you, Chair. Very good question. We need to ensure that, sorry, not working very well. That's better, right? You can hear me good. We obviously need to ensure that we are assessing housing benefit correctly and accurately and in a timely manner. It's an area that DWP are very much focused on. So in terms of the amount of subsidy that we receive, there are kind of various thresholds in terms of how much LA error and administrative delay there is against sort of our overall payment of benefit. So that's how it translates kind of in terms of the financial aspects. In terms of how that translates within the team, we are going to introduce, we've been out to advert for a training and quality assurance officer role, because we actually need to ideally have a post where that person is actually ensuring that officers are trained to the appropriate level, because it is complex legislation, but obviously making sure that they are assessing claims as accurately as possible to minimise those overpayments.
Are there any procedures in place or programmes in place which are actually having a look at some of the individual cases to work out what went wrong in the first instance, so you can begin to generate a kind of a rule of thumb as to what to watch out for in future?
Yes, and every year we have to have a housing benefit subsidy audit, which is performed by Grant Thornton, and as part of that they will identify, particular areas where there may be a repeat error. And what happens is essentially that error potentially can get extrapolated, and they will look at a number of cases with that same level of error, and that will just continue year on year until we can essentially prove to their satisfaction that we're not making that error any longer. So there are certain areas that we know that the team might struggle with. Self-employed income, for example, is quite a tricky area. So if that's identified through our own internal checks or through external auditor checks, we will then put in place measures to provide appropriate training and quality control to ensure that that's not happening again and again and again.
And bearing in mind the last item we discussed, fraud, is there any indication as to what proportion of overpayments are a consequence of fraudulent claims in the first instance that are creeping through, and to what extent they're a result of internal errors that are allowing them through?
I would say DWP kind of set the agenda broadly in relation to fraud, although we obviously have our own internal obligations to make sure that we are preventing fraud and error. Certain things will be kind of deemed to be compliance type issues rather than sort of downright fraud. So I guess it's kind of the intention element. Someone possibly forgot to tell us something rather than deliberately doing the wrong thing. So we do have fraud cases. Fraud transferred to DWP back in 2015. So we do kind of have the opportunity to if there would be a sort of a joint prosecution, DWP might take that on and would include our aspects within that as well. But one area I am kind of keen to have a bit more focus on is working with the Devon Audit partnership, just in some of, just in relation to some of the fraud activities, because we can undertake, or they could undertake investigations on our behalf, and it wouldn't necessarily end up in prosecution, but there's other things that you can apply, like an administrative penalty. So it certainly is an area that we perhaps need to put a little bit more focus on.
Any other queries? Could I just address some of those points to the auditors? I'm showing my ignorance now, but there's several things. One was an annual audit that you guys carried out. The result of that audit came to this committee in the past?
So normally, Chair, through you, we'd report that through a progress report. So the last certified claim was 21-22. We'll be currently undertaking the 22-23 work. Just looking at the response back to the department, as you've described, there's some common areas that generally we would see across a number of authorities linked to income, whether that's self-employed or earned income, and the calculation of that, or the incorrect input of that into the calculation. And the other area was around incorrect local housing allowance rates as well. So again, potentially an input error or a misunderstanding of the relevant area that we're talking about. Just to give committee some context, I don't have the 21-22 claim form. Colleagues might be able to talk broadly in terms of the amount of subsidy that is claimed. Unlike the audit, which I referred to earlier, DWP require us to audit with no materiality. So an issue of £1 needs to be reported to the department. The extrapolations that colleagues referred to there, one of those extrapolations for LHA rates changed sales by £148 in the claim form. The other for income, £10. So we're talking very minor changes to the subsidy claim form, and ultimately the amount of monies that the council are reimbursed for. Clearly, you also heard as well, subsidy for different types of errors is capped. So clearly for the council, limiting those types of errors means that the subsidy can be claimed in full rather than at reduced rates. So that the financial impact of this is ensuring that those errors don't happen. Colleagues also referred, so those errors we will have to test for again this financial year to ensure that either they've been resolved, or if there are issues again, we report them and continue to test those errors until we don't find them again. We also test an initial sample of 20 cases from different types of benefit under the DWP guidance. Any errors identified in those would then trigger further testing also. So I think the values we're talking about here, certainly in terms of the outcomes of our work, are very, very minor when you consider the amount of subsidy and the amount of benefit that's paid out by the council.
Thank you very much. Internal Audit, want to say anything?
Yeah, as has been pointed out already, Chair, the DWP took back possession, if you like, of housing benefit in 2015. They removed that sort of the fraud aspect and capability of dealing with any fraudulent aspect from the council. The council is still required to administer the housing benefit. So we're in a sort of catch-22, most councils are, where you may have housing benefit, which are becoming fewer and fewer, but you may have housing benefit claims which have CTRS attached to them, council tax support attached to them. And in other authorities, we do work on the CTRS side of it and work jointly with the DWP. But as far as the audit is concerned, I haven't seen the audit, so I wouldn't like to comment on it. But yeah, because of the cases, and I having historically dealt with housing benefit fraud prior to 2015, I know about the sort of levels of potential fraud that are involved. So yes, I can imagine that we can work closer together as we go along. But as far as housing benefit is concerned, the DWP are very, very protective.
Thank you very much.
And sorry, just on that, we are just about to start our internal audit on housing benefits. So we'll try to do some work on quantify the you know, how much fraud there might be, or the councils where. I suppose just a matter of context, obviously this is a declining area for the council. The amount of housing benefits is reducing. So the focus is probably moving elsewhere for most councils anyway. But so yeah, so we'll report probably at the next audit committee meeting formally.
Thank you very much. Further comments? Well, thank you very much. Are we happy to note the contents of the report? Looks like it. Thank you. Item 13, on the Ombudsman report. Councillor Edmonds.
And finally from the Chair, thank you. This report sets out details of complaints referred to the Ombudsman Service during the period 1st of April 22 to the 31st of March 2023. In total, 8 complaints were received by the Ombudsman Service, with just one of the complaints put forward for investigation and subsequently upheld. Details of the upheld complaint you'll have noted in paragraph 2.2 of the report. The remaining 7 complaints considered by the Ombudsman were closed without further investigation after initial inquiries. As the report points out, the Ombudsman upholds, on average, 59% of complaints about councils. But because West Devon only had 1 complaint investigated and subsequently upheld, the council has 100% of investigated complaints upheld, which we feel is not a true reflection of the council's performance across a wide range of service areas. The Office for Local Government are currently consulting on future performance measures for councils, and this council has responded with a request that the measure be reconsidered to reflect a fairer reflection of performance. Complaint training for officers in key service areas has been commissioned from the Local Government Ombudsman to further improve the council's complaints handling process. So finally, Chair, the report recommends that the Audit Committee reviews the Ombudsman's letter for the year ended 23, and that can be found at Appendix A.
Thank you, Councillor Edmonds. Anybody got any comments about 100% performance? Yeah, I think I uphold that. I believe there's a little bit more analysis, is there not, Lisa? Darryl produced a little analysis I saw somewhere about the breakdown. Sorry, carry on.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so I think there was a request from Audit Briefing just to understand how we compare to other similar local authorities. And it's fair to say, without rattling off all the numbers, we compare pretty well to other neighbouring authorities. Pretty much all of our SIPFA statistical neighbours have received the same volume of complaints and the same number of upheld complaints, i.e. 1 upheld complaint. Which is why, as Councillor Edmonds says, we do feel that in terms of Oflog and their emerging data sets, it is important to look a bit wider than just the volume of Ombudsman complaints in terms of satisfaction with council services. Because, 100% upheld, it looks like we're doing pretty poor. But I would say the fact that 1 complaint from one of our residents upheld is actually pretty good. And so we think perhaps there's a way we could look at potentially the number of stage 1 complaints received, or some different form of measure.
Would it not be worth just reflecting on the fact that there were 8 complaints in total, that we represent the 1 in that comparative ballpark, that it's actually 12%, not 100% in terms of the total number of complaints that were.
Absolutely, but I think the way it's proposed at the moment, it would just demonstrate 100% upheld, and even of those 8, the majority of the complaints that end up going to the Ombudsman relate to planning, largely requesting that a planning decision be overturned. And as we know, the Ombudsman has no powers to overturn planning decisions. It can consider if there have been procedural failings, but it can overturn a decision. And that's when we find most of them fall away, because they are closed down, because it's not something the Ombudsman can deal with.
Thank you. Is that okay? Yeah. Any other questions? No? Recommendation we review, and we've reviewed it. So we're content to review it. Thank you. Proposed proposed work plan, which is on page 195. I think they're just for note. Are we happy with that? Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for everybody's participated and turned up. I thought it's a very full agenda, a whole 195 pages of thank you for attending. The meeting is now closed. Thank you.